Welcome to The Landscape, George Smith Partners podcast. Welcome, everyone, to The Landscape. This is George Smith Partners podcast. As a reminder to our listeners, please go to gspartners.com and click on sign up for FinFacts, where you can hear all about what George Smith Partners is up to, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform, etc. My name is Evan Kinne. You guys know me, but today I'm joined by a very special co-host, Mr. Nate Weyer. Nate is a senior managing director here at George Smith Partners and is responsible for our Atlanta office and is spearheading our growth in the Southeast. So before we dive into our topic here today and our wonderful guest, I'm going to flip it over to Nate to give a bit of background on himself and introduce our guest.
Sure. Thanks, Evan. Nate Weyer joined George Smith Partners earlier this year. Our objective here in the Southeast is to really focus on advisory and or capital placement, both debt and equity. Really all asset classes, but an asset class that is really near and dear to our heart and growing is build to rent. And that's why we're here today. Specifically, want to introduce Richard Ross, the CEO for Quinn Residences, a pure play build to rent platform in which we serve as the lead advisor on their debt capabilities. So happy to introduce Richard.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Evan. Glad to be here. Appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Yeah. So, Richard, why don't we jump right into it? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what is Quinn Residences?
Well, we'll start with me. I'll make it very quick. I've been doing real estate for 30 years, in the business world for 40. My real estate experience has gone from grocery anchored shopping centers, public and private, multifamily REITs, did a little stint in the cell tower business, a little stint at Rialto Capital, and then found myself just over 5.5 years ago heading up Quinn. What we do at Quinn is we are owner, operator, developer of purpose-built rental communities throughout the southeastern U.S. So we've deployed roughly $600 million of capital across 5,200 homes in 34 communities. And again, these are purpose-built communities. As most people know, contiguous communities. We don't do any of the sort of scattered site buy off the MLS. These are all ground up developments. And as I said, we've built up a considerable portfolio and look forward to doubling that over the next couple of years.
Tell us a little bit about how big you are relative to some of the other pure play build to rent developers.
So good question. It's not like multifamily in the build to rent business. We're sort of in the early stages of the institutionalization of the asset class. So the data, a long-winded way of saying, Evan, the data is not as hard and fast as it would be, say, from the NMHC, from the multi business. Having said that, I would say we are probably the largest pure play operator developer in the south, certainly in the southeastern United States, and by some measurements throughout the country. There are obviously a lot of people in this business. Some of the big boys we know, AMH, Invitation Homes, the two remaining public companies, Tricon, who was recently taken private by Blackstone. Those are sort of the big gorillas, and there are a couple of more sort of next tier. But in terms of pure play focused, I'd say we're one of the largest in the Southeast and the U.S.
Richard, can you tell us about, from kind of the early start of Quinn and kind of how you got to the portfolio where you are today?
Sure. So it's been an interesting evolution, right? When we started, we closed our first deal a month before the lockdown in 2020. And that was a townhome deal in Raleigh, North Carolina. Interestingly enough, we're about to dispose of that deal at the end of this month at a pretty significant return. And back then, we'll all remember that builders, home builders, were long on lots. They owned a ton of lots, and rates were, pretty much near zero. And so they were willing to sell us, 200 lot subdivision at probably a 15% discount to retail, if you will, because they wanted to just keep the machine moving. And so we probably did our first dozen deals with home builders. We do not build the homes, we engage other home builders. And so our first, I'm going to say, 12, 15 deals were done on that model where we would take a home down at certificate of occupancy, put it on our platform, lease it, and, finish out the community. Then obviously, a couple things happened. The builders during the pandemic were selling homes faster than they could build them at margins they hadn't seen in, I would venture to say, 20 years. And so why would I discount a subdivision to Quinn when I can get 30% margins on homes that I can just churn out? And obviously that we had to change our philosophy and our underwriting to a more development focused process. And that's what we did, I would say, starting in sort of the second half of 22, where we began to acquire land, entitled land. We don't buy unentitled land, just from a risk perspective. Buying entitled land, funding the horizontal and the vertical development, and obviously the lease up. And that's obviously, as you know, Nate, where you helped us sort of build a credit facility that allowed us to do that and differentiated us from everyone else in the market. So the last couple of years, we have done a more development-centric building of the portfolio. Of course, now that could be changing again, and I think it is, meaning that home builders' margins are eroding with the, skyrocketing mortgage rates, so they cannot sell homes as fast as they want. They've had to discount them considerably, and I would say today that probably their margins are below where they historically have been, which is typically like 15%. So the pendulum is, long-winded way of saying, the pendulum is swinging back to where we are probably a buyer of preference from a lot of these home builders.
So you're well capitalized. You have a large debt facility that you mentioned. You've got a lot of equity capital. How do you guys think about site selection and growing the platform over the next few years here? And I think, what are the key opportunities that you're looking for?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the home builders have sort of swung back. Unfortunately, most of the lots they control, they don't own them anymore, as we probably all know. They land bank them and they take them down as they need them. But the lots they control are pretty out there in terms of what I would call the green portion. So exurban and even further out. So I'm not going to chase land out into markets that we have no business being in. And whether it's Atlanta, Raleigh, Charlotte, basically 3 rings out, if you will. But those are the only lots that are really available for development. Unless, and we are focusing on this, there's some little niche infill sites that, for whatever reason, maybe have environmental challenges that we can find and sort of add to our platform and get to scale in, let's say, a central business district in Atlanta, Raleigh, or Charlotte, Tampa, Orlando, which are our primary market. So where's the opportunity? I think the opportunity is coming in acquiring stabilized and near stabilized deals in lease up, or troubled deals from builders who have started a subdivision and now they can't finish it. We're not going to buy the last 40 homes from Lennar or D.R. Horton. We just don't do that. There are folks that do that, but I think there are a lot of operators out there who got started in 2021, the early days of the pandemic, and thought they would get to where we are, 5,000 homes or 2,500 homes. And maybe they have 5 deals or 6 deals and they're at 1,000 homes or 1,200 homes. And it's really hard to make those economics work. They built a platform, but getting your margins, managing 1,200 homes is just really difficult. It's hard enough for us at 5,000 So doing a much smaller scale is really difficult. You have a couple of things there as well. The equity has dried up, I think, for non-scale operators. So I know several equity participants in the market have said, we're not going to fund any more deals. So we need to monetize the deals that we own. So that's one prong of the, and then as Nate knows well, there's a lot of debt that was put on, whether these are regional banks, it typically was during the pandemic, and those are typically 3-year construction loans. Maybe they have a 1 or 2 year extension option. And maybe they've kicked the can, the regional bank, a year because of the dislocation in the market. But those loans are coming due and they're not going to be extended. So we have some stress on operators that way. And I also see, because I saw this in multifamily in the mid 90s, where you institutionalized and consolidated the multifamily operators. In the early 90s, when all the big multifamily REITs were formed, I think institutions owned, I might mess up the numbers, but close enough, like 5-6% of multifamily. They now own half of the multifamily in this country. That's going to happen in build to rent. Today, in build to rent, I think institutions own 3 to 5% of the total BTR stock nationwide. I think in the next 10 to 15 years, that could easily go to half. And obviously that supply is going to keep growing. So there's room for consolidation. There's room to take out challenged operators, whether that's their challenged equity, they're challenged in debt, or they're challenged by operations, getting the margins that they need. So that's where I see the opportunity, let's just say in the next 1 to 5 years.
That's a great answer.
That's great. Yeah, for sure. So Richard, hurdle then. So obviously that's the opportunity. Well, hurdles have always been with BTR being a newer asset class and people having a stigma around rental versus solving for a housing crisis in which we're in an affordability issue right now, lack of housing. What's the headwinds currently that you're seeing from either local municipalities or the federal, government regarding, institutions coming into the BTR space? How much of a risk is that right now?
So if I were to tell you, if you would ask me what keeps me up at night, it would be all of those things: local, state, and federal. On a federal level, the FTC has an open study. They just issued a market study. This was actually to the tail end of the Biden administration, but the Trump administration has continued it. There was a public comment period that ended in March, and they're basically asking institutional owners, anybody who owns more than 1,000 homes, so that's like 32 companies, and they want an exhaustive list of how are you finding your tenants, what are your rental rates, what's your transparency, just 100 questions of basically getting in my knitting. And that study is underway now. They finished the public comment. We don't know where it's going to go. I think if I were a betting man, I'd say 50% chance that continues and they seek all of that information. The FTC does, and then they digest it once they get it, and legislation could come out of that, limiting, the number of homes that any one owner can own, or limiting depreciation, limiting interest deduction. There's a number of levers they can pull to make it difficult. And the perception is, and it always has been, that particularly the scattered site guys, the guys who were formed out of the GFC, have been taking homes away from Joe and Sue who want to buy, a $280,000 home in Peoria, Illinois. I'm making it up. And some big public company went and bought that home and stole it, if you will, from them. The facts don't bear that out. And the National Rental Home Council, which is our industry group, has tons of facts that don't bear that out. But there is a public perception that these big institutions have taken homes that otherwise Joe and Sue could have bought. I would argue they put a floor under the housing market during the GFC, and if they hadn't bought those homes, it would have been a lot worse. That's probably for another podcast.
So
talking about
go ahead.
States, there are some, and here in Georgia, we had a really nasty bill last session that didn't make it out of committee, but it's coming back in the next session, which I guess starts in January. And so for that, it's basically they were trying to say anybody who owns more than 2,000 homes in Georgia, which would be us and several companies like us, would have to 4-year period to divest. Like that's it, or pay some ridiculous penalty. So what we've done there, and I think all of the solution to all of this is we have not done a good job as an industry of educating federal, state, and even local officials about what it is that we do. In that we are professionally managing 200 unit communities, adding to supply. These are brand new homes. It's not like we are buying stuff off the MLS and soaking up supply. In fact, we're adding to supply, which is the fundamental problem in this country that we've had since the GFC. We just haven't built enough homes. So what we've had some success doing, and I've spent this last month reaching out to state legislators and congressmen, U.S. federal level folks, and explaining to them what it is we do and having our residents tell the story, because really they're the ones, who are voting for these folks. And when you hear a 20-year veteran of the Georgia State Patrol say he's living in one of our homes because he wants to build a home, but he can't afford to, and he needs 3 or 4 years to be able to save the money, and this is a great alternative for him because he gets, a fenced backyard and a 2-car garage and a brand new home while he waits to accumulate his money. Or then we have another resident who bought 3 franchises of a fast food company and needs to live in the middle of those 3 and can't afford a home in there, but he can rent from us. So when you get the resident to tell the story and you explain the facts behind the business, it becomes much easier to overcome these legislative or this anti-renter bias, if you will.
So strongly in the renter by choice advocacy camp, I guess
Yes.
you could
Yes,
say.
because what's interesting, when we started this business, I would have told you that our primary resident would have been a couple moving out of a, multifamily apartment, about to have a child or having their second child, and they want, a 3-bedroom home. And that's been true for about 1/3 of our residents. But 2/3 of our residents don't have children. And what they like about our offering, if you will, is 0 maintenance. They don't have to mow the lawn. They don't have to unclog the toilet. The brand new home, which they couldn't otherwise get, and the flexibility. I might want to live in Charlotte for 3 years, but I might then get transferred to Phoenix, right? Or Denver. And so if I own a home, it's a little bit harder to have that flexibility. So there's a lot of reasons behind this business other than just moving up and moving out of an apartment.
Yeah.
Love it.
Go ahead, Nate.
So Richard, how do you view, it seems always when we get in conversation with folks on, build to rent, it's home builder, you talk about home building and BTR, but what's your view on the multifamily players really looking at this as an extension of their existing businesses?
Good question. So we're selling the first asset we bought back before the pandemic to a multifamily owner. And you've seen some of them dip their toes in this business. It's a logical line extension, right? So these big multifamily REITs who own, as I said, 50% of the apartments, well, that cohort, typical apartment dweller, right, is, I'm going to make this up, but 21 to 30 years old. Well, as they age, where are they going to go? They're going to leave the apartment at some point. And so if I'm an owner of 1 million apartments like Greystar, like, why wouldn't I get into the next evolution of that person's home? And that's going to drive and is already driving. Now, we don't operate like multifamily. I say this a lot. The management and operation of these communities, you can't put 8 people on a property like you have in a 400 unit multifamily building, right? You got a couple leasing agents, you got 3 maintenance guys, 4 maintenance guys, and 2 property managers. because everybody's the density is there. In our communities, the operations just won't, the margin won't handle that. But we're also not scattered site where you have, 40 homes scattered all over an MSA, which is a lot harder to manage. We're somewhere in between. And that's, I think, where we have differentiated ourselves and figured out sort of the right way to operate these properties. And that's where the home builders who they also have gotten in this business, D.R. Horton, Lennar, several of them have made attempts at, if rather than sell them to Quinn, let's build the communities and rent them ourselves. It's not as easy as people think.
So I have a question for you. You've got, 5,000 plus units. Um, you have some pretty ambitious growth plans. Earlier in the conversation, we were talking a little bit about how you create some incremental growth. We were talking about some weaknesses in the market, and you mentioned, there's maybe some operators out there with 500 or 1,000 units who just haven't really hit the stride with respect to access to true pools of institutional managed capital. Do you see opportunities to grow kind of inorganically, acquiring maybe other businesses?
Yes, I
And
mean, and I know that. Look, in multi, you saw, in the, as I said, in the mid '90s and now in late '90s, a lot of companies got rolled up, and the big boys bought the littler guys, or you combine two littles to make a medium kind of thing. That's going to happen in this industry. What's preventing it right now is I think people are still hanging on to the hope. Look, we're in the real estate business. When you can build a deal as you could in the 2020, 2021 at a 7 yield on cost and sell it at a 4, you're going to make money and your promote is going to be significant. Well, those days are gone. But I think the capitulation is there's still some hope out there.
yep,
And you also have folks who have built a little bit of a platform. So they have a CFO, right? They have a chief investment officer. They have a staff of 10 people. And being willing to sort of let that go and get acquired by somebody else or merge with somebody else takes some time for the principals to, if you will, acquiesce to, okay, no mas. Like, let's divide, either join together and pick the best group of 10 people. I'm just making this up. Or I'm willing to go home, take my whatever profit I can get and move on. So
right.
that's coming.
So if you just to follow up here, and then I'll flip it back to Nate, but just to follow up here, if you did stuff like that, there's some markets that have been pretty depressed. Is this an opportunity to kind of move into some of those other markets, like, for example, Nashville and Austin and Phoenix? Like there's, roller coaster markets that we had through the last 3 or 4 years here. I mean, you certainly must be looking at these markets every day, but how do you think about those and getting in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's all a question of basis, right? I mean, there are rent ceilings in markets everywhere, and that's different in every market. But I can tell you, San Antonio, Texas, for instance, you're not going to get more than $2,000 a month in rent. I don't care if you have, a gorgeous home.
Right.
You're only going to get 2,000. So that's the ceiling. So that, right, you back into what can you pay for a home at that rental, and that's sort of where we look at markets like Austin, Nashville. Nashville's an interesting market because there's a lot of barriers to entry there. So there's some stickiness on the downside there. But Huntsville, Phoenix, which is way overbuilt, but look, that supply is going to get swallowed and absorbed. So again, it's a question, Evan, of can we get in at the right basis where we can get our return and also realize scale, because with scale comes benefits in terms of, lower G&A spread, lower insurance costs, all those kinds of things. So it's just an underwriting exercise. And at some point, to your point, those markets will make sense, whether it's for us or somebody else,
Mhm.
to begin to acquire significant portfolios. I mean, look, Tricon's already doing it, right? So.
Yep.
So Richard, little bit of a different question. So obviously you built up a very strong portfolio, but you have to build it, right? You're building it, not acquiring, right? So you pivoted there. Obviously, the credit facility that we put in place early on and grew it to the size in which it is today is giving you a competitive advantage to that. Do you get a common question from your peer group on, hey, Richard, outside of these questions that we're asking you from a peer to peer, you know, is there a common theme that people are asking you if you're seeing the same thing they're seeing? And it could be, how are you finding your deals? Could be anything we've already discussed, but is there anything that people are reaching out to you to ask for your advice on from a peer basis?
Well, I think what we've all figured out, when I say all, I mean all my peers, because I know them all and I talk to them. I had breakfast with one today. We're all realizing that we're back into like a more normal market. The pandemic, I mean, we were getting double digit rent growth, every quarter, uh,
Mm.
and certainly on an annual basis. And those days are gone. And these things are, when I say these things, these homes, operating them is not a slam dunk. It's not like a 500 unit suburban, apartment tower in Buckhead, Atlanta, or um, uptown Charlotte. So there's a nuance to managing these that you have to sort of figure out. So they ask me about that. What the question I get the most is, how can I have a credit facility that you got? And I said, well, talk to Nate. But in all seriousness, that's something that has differentiated us. And as you well know, Nate, we were able to, because of who our equity partners are, and because we were an early entrant and we had gotten to some level of scale, we were able to put together something that allowed us to do what we've done. And that will continue to evolve as we look at doing M&A, Evan, as you referred to, or going into new markets. We'll have to craft a new debt facility that will allow us to maximize the returns on that kind of investment. And I have every confidence that you'll be able to do that for us.
Yeah. So if you're looking to sell your company to Richard or get a credit facility, pick up the phone and call Nate, huh? Um, let's let's switch gears here a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about um, innovation in the space. And innovation is kind of a pretty loose term. So let me narrow that down a little bit. You guys primarily buy homes from production builders, like you mentioned, in large quantities, contiguous homes. I just want to clear that up because we may have some listeners who are a little bit new to the space here or wondering about it. But we're talking about contiguous, so a bunch of homes next to each other, a couple hundred homes, managed like a community. However, obviously production home building is a game of margins. So there's been a lot of hoopla and up and down test communities with this type of construction or that type of construction. On the materials and technology side, what innovations do you see coming and how will those influence your business? And I want to add just a little bit more to the question before you respond. And that is, you're thinking about this as a long-term owner of these assets. And so your mindset is going to align much more with like a consumer than it would potentially a home builder looking to clear inventory.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack there. I would say,
Yeah, sorry.
no, that's okay. That's okay, Evan. Some of the things we're doing immediately, right? We put a pretty high-end technology package in the home, which allows us to monitor the home, and gives our residents sort of all the bells and whistles that they want. Hot internet when they move in. We have leak detections throughout the home. We have a security puck that when a home's vacant, we can tell if somebody's in there, in
Interesting.
our home, sort of trying to do something they shouldn't be doing, squatting or whatever. We've read a lot about that. We're building. We don't put any carpet in our homes. It's all solid surface flooring, uh,
Hmm.
which is again goes to durability. We paint. You talk about production home builders. We put 2 coats of very high quality paint. Sherwin-Williams. I'll give a plug. Paint on the walls so that when we turn a unit, we don't have to repaint, as we call it, quarter and a quarter.
Hmm.
Just touch up walls. So those are all things that improves the longevity of the home. We fence all our backyards. Obviously, that's a resident centric thing, but it also these are long-term powder-coated steel fences, which differentiate us from some of the other, again, production home builders. We put solar on 6 of our communities so far, and we'll probably roll it out to all of them, because it's long-term. It's an upfront investment, obviously, but it produces a decent return in power savings for us and for the resident. So we pass on about 20% of the savings to the resident so that they get a lower power bill. They feel good living in a solar powered home, but it's a good return on our investment. And again, for the longevity of the home. Now, on the broader question, we haven't changed how we built a home since World War II. I mean, my father built homes in the 50s. You poured a slab, you put up the walls, you called in the HVAC contractor, you called the electrician, you called the plumber, and then the finish, we're still building homes like that. There has to be a better way. And
Right.
there are a number, particularly the big home builders, but there's a number of smarter people than me figuring out a better way to build the home, because depending on who you believe, we're short 3 to 6 million homes in this country. And by the way, it's getting worse every year. Like, more households are formed in this country than we're building homes. So we need to find a better way to build a home. I imagine in the next 5 to 10 years, we will figure that out. Someone will figure that out, and they'll probably be very rich at the end of the day. So, but that goes to sort of more the long term. How do you overcome the supply shortage in this country? But also for us, how do we build a home faster, right? Because we're buying the dirt, if you will, and it takes 30 months to build the community and stabilize it, right? Get to 90%, 95% occupancy. And that's a long time, right? We're all real estate guys here. We know that the IRR, the shorter you can make that period of that gestation period, as I talk to it, the better the return is going to be for the owner. I don't
Great.
know if I unpacked it all there, Evan, but
No, that was good. Obviously, in our experience, well, maybe not obviously, we've seen it all here at George Smith. I'll just be very transparent. Like, every week there's another idea. And, whether it's, prefabricated construction, panelized construction, 3D printed construction, there, you name it, it's out there. There's got to be a better way. The challenge is, though, that, as you know, with labor the way it is, et cetera, I mean, these crews are super well trained, they move super fast, and they can, they just don't have the CapEx burden, frankly, that adding a factory to the process does in many cases. So, it'll be really interesting to see how this kind of pans out over the next few years. And particularly, one thing I've thought a lot about is energy, not to get into like a whole new category here, but in order for us to remain like very competitive as a country, we need to put a lot of energy on our grid over the next few years. And if we're adding new homes and et cetera that are more energy efficient, helps us propel ourselves forward to using energy in other areas like AI, et cetera. But this is a big topic. We're not going to solve it here today. I will say, though, one thing that we've seen consistently is that the financing and the availability of financing for the traditional built homes just so far exceeds the financing availability for almost any other type of construction that it makes it a very difficult economic, analysis, even if you have a great product, et cetera. So hopefully we see more kind of innovation on the financial side there over the next few years.
Yeah, and that as to your point, will take some time, whether that's 10
Yeah.
20 years. But I will say some things we are doing, the solar, for instance, right? That's an upfront investment, but it saves money in the long term, particularly
Absolutely.
for the owner. The other thing we've experimented with is there's a new HVAC system. It's called REAI. I'm probably going to bastardize the name, but instead of having, I'm going to make this up, in your living room 4 duct vents, it's like 15, and they're tiny.
Oh, interesting.
They're like little, almost like tubes, and it may not look the best on the roof, although they've done really good job, but it cuts your energy consumption, your heating and cooling costs, by like 30%,
Interesting.
which kind of makes sense, right? Because
Yeah,
you're dispersing the air the refrigerated or heated air much more broadly than just blowing it out of 4 vents.
right. You're relying less on thermal conduction through other parts of the house.
Correct. And so
That-
we've been
yeah.
able to, on a couple of our communities, get to net zero homes. I don't
Interesting.
know if you're familiar with HERS
Sure.
HERS scores.
Yeah.
The average Lennar home builder home, DR Horton home, has a HERS scores of about 70, 60 to 70, zero being net zero. With solar and this REAI system, we've gotten to zero, and in some cases, we've gotten negative, like -3 or -5. So long term, to your point, if you can get paid to do that, it makes sense.
That's great. Nate, you want to ask a final question here? Give Richard like a real tough one. Let's finish it off on a good one here.
Well, Richard's a professional, so I'm not sure there's
I
any.
know he's too good. You can't throw him off.
Don't ask me anything about interest rates. I can tell you because I'll be wrong.
I will not. Yeah, Evan, Richard and I talk all the time, so you may be better versed to ask a question that I haven't already asked him over the last 4 years.
All right. Well, I got one
about tariffs.
Yeah. Let's hear your. What's the latest on tariffs? I'm sure you're a huge fan of tariff volatility and not knowing what you're going to get next week, right? Is that your favorite thing?
So I don't know that any of us know. Well, I know that none of us know. My belief is that we won't know for assuming everything settles out in the next month, meaning we know that India's this and Mexico's that and the EU is this. It's going to take 6 months for that to kind of trickle through in my business, how much I'm going to pay for windows, how much I'm going to pay for washers and dryers. And, people are saying, oh, it's probably anywhere from, $3,000 to $6,000 a home, but I'm not sure that anybody really knows. What scares me a little bit, and this might be something that's waking me up as we were talking before about the regulation, is I think it's going to hurt the consumer. And we're already seeing it in our business, meaning our collections aren't what they were a year ago. Our rent increases aren't what they were 2 years ago. And so I think the consumer is going to feel it, and that will permeate right throughout the economy. So that's my pontification.
I like it. All right. Well, let's wrap it up. Anything else you want to throw in there, or should we kind of wrap it up here, Richard?
Well, look, I appreciate you guys. Both Nate and George Smith, you guys have been great partners for us, and look forward to continuing to expand that relationship. And let's go consolidate BTR and be the next Equity Residential.
That's right. All right. So where do people find out more about you, Richard, if they want to interact with Quinn or rent a home?
Sure. The best place is our website, which is live-quinn.com. And you can find out all you need right there.
Great. Well, thank you for coming on today. And again, for our listeners, be sure to go to gspartners.com, subscribe to FinFacts, and of course, subscribe to this podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, probably some other places as well. So thank you, Richard.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.